Join us September 25th, 26th, and 27th for a 3-day special streaming event, Strange Realities, to push the limits of your reality. Featuring authors, academics, researchers, occultists, experiencers, podcasters, and practitioners. All presenting fresh cutting-edge material and research. Streaming live. Featuring presentations by
Brent Rains,
editor of Alternate Perceptions magazine.
Aaron Goulias,
host of the Saucer Life podcast.
David Matcalfe,
writer and researcher.
Alan Greenfield,
author of Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts.
Stephanie Quick,
writer and blogger.
Red Pill Junkie,
Fortean researcher and explorer.
Tim Banal,
host of Banal of America.
Guy Malone,
iconoclast and troublemaker.
Timothy Ritter,
host of Strange Familiars.
Kiki Dombrowski,
author and practitioner.
Greg Bishop,
author of Project Beta.
Ginny Ashford,
host of 13 O'Clock.
Recluse,
host of The Farm.
Jack Montgomery,
Folk Magic.
Joshua Cutchin,
author of Thieves in the Night.
Reverend Michael Carter,
Alien Contact Experiencer.
Dr. Future,
host of Future Quake.
Tony Kale,
author of Memphis Hoodoo.
Wren Collier,
occultist.
Soraya Askap,
host of Where Did the Road Go? John Tinney, Ghost Stalkers in Hell.
All 3 days, only $20. Tickets and info available at strangerealitiesconference.com. Brought to you by the Conspirinormal podcast. Conspirinormal.com. Strange Realities.
Welcome back, everybody. Live once again on special edition Conspirinormal, the Strange Realities preview edition, and we are on the last section here, and as you can see, we have a crowd. Serfiel is back, of course, and David Matcalfe, and Dr. Future. Say hello. and Recluse. You guys are finally seeing what Recluse looks like. And Wren Collier has joined us as well. So welcome, guys, to this episode of Conspirinormal.
Conspirinormal.
That's right.
We had to make everybody take the tape off of their webcam.
Yeah.
I literally had to take it off for this episode. You better believe I keep it on there.
I don't even keep mine hooked up, man.
I have mine on right now. Is it shielding the video good? I hope you can't see me.
That's why you've got that sheen, right, Dr. Future? You got that nice white sheen over you.
It's a glow.
So
I asked for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
We're going to talk about these guys' presentations, and we're going to just see what we get into a little bit. So this may be a little more stream of consciousness. But let's start. Now, David is here just to help us out with questions, to try to referee, keep everybody from killing each other, all that good stuff. So, Dr. Future, we'll start with you. And if you guys don't know who Dr. Future is, and people streaming, like, you should know. Like, Dr. Future was literally the first guest ever on Conspirinormal, and has been on Conspirinormal like a billion times. So, Dr. Future, what are you going to be talking about at the Strange Realities Conference 2020?
Well, what I want to know is what happened to Serfiel. I see he disappeared, and suddenly the audio was warping and modulating.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just trying to.
I mean, I've had
what's going on.
I have been concerned about him ever since he was outed as being QAnon. It was okay that I mentioned that one. Didn't y'all already reveal that, or I didn't speak out of turn? I hope.
Damn it.
Because he said whatever we're in, we're all in it together, or something like that.
Yeah, we were going to reveal that later on tonight, Mike. But since you've already talked about it, that Serfiel was actually QAnon. That he's been working real hard on that project for the last few years. So
yeah, we're all for one, or we all go through together. Or something. Yeah, I started wondering about Serfiel when I saw that album cover where you all were walking across the street and he was barefoot.
Yeah.
I knew there wasn't something quite right there with him. I'm getting quite a delay on this. I don't know if do you have a a white van outside with a big microwave dish aiming at you all producing this? Because I'm getting a lot of delay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Are you on Chrome, Mike?
Yeah, I'm on Chrome.
Okay.
But it's having a massive delay between us and you. So,
okay. No,
did you ask me something, Adam? I forget. Why am I here?
Yeah, why are you here? It's like Admiral Stockdale. Why are you here? Who are you, and why are you here?
Exactly. I could be a VP. Yes. Did you ask me what I'm going to talk about?
Yeah, what you're going to talk about at Strange Realities Conference.
Okay. Sorry about the delay. It's doing a weird delay here. Well, I just started on it in the last day or so. And part of it is that I just finished posting, I think, the Guinness record for world's longest blog post. And I don't know, Adam, have you seen it? Any of the rest of you all?
You're going to have some stiff competition from John Bevilacqua, I can tell you that. The GIS blog that he gave me for the one thing that he did for his podcast to promote it, man, I mean, it was probably like 30,000 words or something like that. I mean, it was just unreal. I'm still having nightmares about editing it, honestly.
Yeah, mine were 34,006.
Okay.
Mine were 34,600.
I didn't think it was possible, Doc, but you did it, so I can.
And no pictures. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I copied it over to a Word document, and it was 60 pages.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 60 pages. So, and it was, I almost considered doing it for my presentation because it gets into who some of the people really are behind the scenes on the hydroxychloroquine thing. And it focuses on the Israeli connection and some weird skullduggery going on in the culprit world, and also some really creepy culty figures, as if we don't know on that side. So I don't know, Adam, if you all talked about the Magic 8-Ball and its effect on America's youth that was exposed by America's frontline doctors.
I don't think that we have discussed that. We did discuss a little bit about America's frontline doctors a couple of times ago when we had Recluse on, but yeah. We did not talk about the effect of the Magic 8-Ball upon America's youth.
Well, another group I expose in there that is involved in endorsing this is a larger, older group called the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. And they run sort of an academic medical journal. And in there, they actually exposed that the O in the Obama logo was actually a crystal ball. And they used that to actually hypnotize America. I didn't know if you all had talked about that or not.
No, that's priceless, though, man. That's definitely something.
But I'm not talking about any of that. Yeah. Well, Recluse, I don't know what you're wasting your time doing. That's like the kind of thing you need to get to the bottom on.
I mean, maybe you could even tell me
rather than wasting your time.
My life.
No, I'm Dr. Future, but I'm not that clairvoyant. The thing I'm going to talk about is I just got a hold of that first got it. Unlike Recluse, I don't have it. Oh, it's amazing I even got it. But from the university that hosts the records of J. Howard Pugh, the guy in my book that I recently released that I show is really the father of the religious right. They actually house all of his records. J. Howard Pugh he and his father were the founder of Sunoco. And he was the one that started Christian Economics, major basically Christian right publication about the big business and Christianity, and Christianity Today he founded. But he really is the founder of everything that I've been writing about in my books. And because of COVID, I could not go up. It's in Delaware, at University in Delaware, where all of his records are. I could not go there. You have to apply to get a grant to go there, which I'm going to do. But I was able to get them to give me some information, and I don't know how much you want to reveal, Adam. Do we want to spill the beans here about details of what I'll be talking about, or save some surprises, or what?
Well, I mean, we need to save some things definitely for the conference, for the people that are going to be there, and and such. We don't want to go too far into it, but just kind of like, we just kind of want to get like a gist. So,
okay. Well, I'll throw this out. One of the interesting folders they have at the university that I found, amongst a lot of things, including J. Howard Pugh, who's this very distinguished gentleman, a real father of the Christian right and evangelicals, and highly, highly regarded, very pious Presbyterian leader, was his involvement in things like the John Birch Society. He never talked about it, but he was very involved from the very beginning with the John Birch Society. He was also involved with Willis Harmon, who was really the father of what we would call white supremacy, Holocaust denial. He was the one that really got that movement going in America. But the thing that really caught my eye, I had to sort of do triage on what I could talk them into sending me to get started, was his appearance at Bohemian Grove. And in Grove, I actually got his records. He brought a whole lot of papers home from his visit there. And a lot of you guys have probably seen a lot of that stuff before, but there was a lot of explanation about cremation of care, what it was about. Very, very important people historically at that one event in the summer of 1947 he went at that sort of rewrote history, even in the weeks before and after that event. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, show about his correspondence with J. Edgar Hoover, who also joined him at Bohemian Grove that week. The files that the FBI had on J. Howard Pugh, and also guys like Harmon and others who showed another side of J. Howard Pugh that he kept from Christians. Anyone who has any kind of discernment should not be completely surprised about sort of the duplicity of a gentleman like that, but I'm going to try to give a taste of some of that. I'm going to document it in a higher degree. It's sort of an unexpected addition to my volume 2. Mostly completely written now. It's needed to get it, reformatted and edited and ready for publication. But I'm going to add a very lengthy chapter on some new information on J. Howard Pugh, because there would be no religious right without him. He was the guy who bankrolled them. He gave them their identity, and he had sort of another life that he tried to cover up. In his biographies, they didn't talk about it. They kept it hush-hush. But there is a paper trail, and I think I probably only just barely scratched the surface. But I'm going to show some of that at the conference.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah. All good stuff. I'm really looking forward to it.
Can you talk about the who his mate was in the cabin when he was at Bohemian Grove? Are you going to get into him?
Yeah, I got a list.
That was a really interesting.
It sounds like I'm not shocked that you have more information than I have, probably, which I'm not shocked. I'm sort of the poor man Surfiel, to this group. If you can't afford the real thing, you break glass and you get a Dr. Future out. So I'm the Department of Redundancy department for your all's research, particularly Recluse. So, but yeah, I do have some information in his files about who was there with him. But maybe you and I need to talk offline a little bit more. Maybe you have some more intelligence data I don't have.
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Okay. Go ahead, Surfiel.
Oh, I was just saying, I'm really happy that we got those two connected, and also Dr. Future and David too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very much so.
They've shared a lot of information together and have pieces to each other's puzzles.
Oh yeah.
Especially when it comes to like Defender Press.
Yeah, Defender puzzle. So,
right.
Yeah.
I'm sort of I give these guys a ho hum. What were you saying, David?
I was just going to say this is kind of a strange, little puzzle arrangement here, because Recluse has such a deep dive into the kind of social aspect of it, and more kind of governmental and different family traditions. I don't know, what would you call like the, different kind of scones of American culture. And, my fascination with the spiritual warfare and charismatic Christianity and Christian right movement, and then Dr. Future kind of blending those two together,
Yeah, very much so. So Recluse, let's talk about what you're going to speak about at the at our Strange Realities conference.
Well, I just kind of figured that out like a couple of days ago. I usually don't know how this stuff is going to turn out actually until I, actually start doing it. I wrote a 80,000 word book on the Epstein thing. It's actually going to be the first book in a trilogy, and I didn't actually know what I was going to be about when I started writing it. I just kind of go with the stuff. But anyway, for this one, I decided that it was going to be an exploration of conspiracy theories as a sub-project of MK Ultra that are now running amok, essentially. So it's going to be a pretty deep dive into a lot of crazy stuff. I'm going to get into Cybermen. I'm going to get into the real Men in Black. I'm going to give you guys a lot of really obscure Cold War history. Let's see, just all kinds of crazy stuff. We're going to talk about everybody from Edward Lansdale to Charles Willoughby to Adriana Puharich, just all kinds of insanity. And I haven't finished the end yet. And then I'm going to try to teach myself how to do PowerPoint by tomorrow, actually, so that I will have it ready by next week. So
you're getting into the 9, huh?
I don't know if we'll get around to the 9 in this one or not. There was a lot of stuff I was thinking I was going to talk about, but it's already, the script I wrote is already at 10,000 words, and I still have to get to the sort of quasi conclusion I had come to yet. So yeah, I don't know if you guys want me to speak for 3 hours or something like that, but we'll see how it goes. But
yeah, that stuff goes pretty deep. That's for sure.
Oh, trust me, I've got plenty of crazy connections that a lot of people I think are going to be shocked by when I go into some of this stuff.
Cool. Looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I've already made kind of the point that for a paranormal conference, that first night, well, I guess we're kind of billing this as a paranormal conference. I was talking to telling Mike this yesterday when we were talking on the phone, but for a paranormal conference, that first night, those first 4 speakers, there's going to be nothing paranormal.
Trust me, I'm bringing the weird, man.
Yeah, you're bringing the weird for sure. For
parapolitical, at least.
The parapolitical.
Oh, it's going to get into really, really weird here towards the end of the thing. Trust me.
Can you kind of for the audience and nobody, we have 9 people watching right now. So for those 9 people at the moment, and whoever else is going to watch this, yes, 9. The 9 are watching right now. Can you get into what does parapolitical mean? What is how do you define that?
Well, I mean, it's basically the scholarly.
Hey, by the way, is that the Ogdode that is watching?
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry.
What?
You said the 9. Is that the Ogdode?
Oh, no, we're talking about the 9 that were channeled in the seance, Doc. The seance that channeled America.
Okay.
Has it ever been called that, the seance that changed America? Because I
think Lavinda referred to it as something along those lines. I'm not 100% sure. My copy of Sinister Forces is out of reach right now.
That's a good phrase.
So what were we talking about again? Something about we had 9 people watching, and then
define parapolitical.
Oh, that's right. Define. Okay, so it was kind of like the scholarly, I guess, answer to conspiracy theories or something, where effectively you're trying to go through real source material. I mean, recently I've really gotten into a lot of personal papers and stuff like that. That's going to be some stuff that I might get into a little bit for my presentation. If you guys are really lucky, you might get to hear the Orgone Manifesto of the Men in Black. It's really freaking kooky. But you're trying to sort of essentially separate the wheat and the chaff, not get, emotional, try not to get really caught up to one political bias or another. I think I do a pretty good job at that. My ex basically left me in part because I had apparently drifted too far to the right, in her opinion. On the flip side of the coin, I was just accused of being a crypto communist today by some listener of my podcast. So it seems like I've got most of my bases covered,
yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
So anyway, you know, I mean, essentially it's like doing a lot of heavy footnotes and not citing like "Behold a Pale Horse" over and over again. You know, the actual archive material and those types of things, the stuff that you see Peter Dale Scott and Jeffrey Bale and people like that doing.
Yeah, in fact, if you guys have not been listening to Recluse's podcast that he does called Farm, you guys should be, because he digs really deep along with a lot of other guests that he's had on. Pennyroyal guys have been on there quite a lot. In fact, I think you just released a show with them, and Dr. Future has been on there too, just not too long ago, about a month or so ago.
Yeah, we're going to get back here real soon too. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got to talk about some Georgia Guidestones at some point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's where David is right now.
Did you say Jeffrey Bale was
Jeffrey Bale?
That Bale. Okay, I thought you said Bale. I didn't know if he was the guy Tony Loves Chachi.
Well, I mean, he did speak. Didn't he speak at the Republican convention?
Scott Baio did, yeah.
Yeah, Scott Baio.
Yes, and I have a picture of him on my computer next to the MyPillow.com guy, Mike Lindell. My post. They're good buddies.
Like a background, like your desktop background.
Well, it's on my nightstand.
Okay.
Mike's taking a big regimen of oleandra right now. That's what's going on. So, hydroxychloroquine, and oleandra, and UV light. Mm-hmm. He's getting UV light into his veins.
Actually, I've been promoting Y9D, which is the old secret ingredient in Tennessee Pride sausage. I don't know if you remember the commercial, but that was the secret ingredient.
Right. All right, so Wren, let's talk about what you're going to talk about at Strange Realities.
All right, so the talk is going to be a general overview of the Hollow Earth, and kind of with a focus on like sort of the history of it, sort of the various theories around it, but especially focusing on like subterranean fiction and fiction built around it, because that's something that's fascinating for a while. I recently wrote an essay for a collection about fae themes in pop culture, and my essay was on Takashi Shimizu's low-budget direct-to-video horror film Mari Dito, where I kind of talk about the changeling narrative in that movie, but also the sort of whole Greek catabasis and like narrative about like descent into the underworld, the gaining of knowledge, and then bringing that knowledge or failing to bring that knowledge back up to the surface. And so a part of the discussion is also going to be around that, about sort of, journeys into the underworld, the whole idea of like crossing the abyss to gain like knowledge of oneself, and how, failure to integrate that knowledge can destroy you. And also going to be kind of focusing on a little bit about like esoteric Nazism. And it's some of the, it's possible to separate some of the Hollow Earth stuff from like, the real Becoming Race book and the Office, and like the Tool Society and stuff. And a few things, I sort of was hinting about this on Twitter, about how the ending is going to be kind of a downer. So I'm not going to spoil it, but I'm also going to talk a bit about what the real Hollow Earth, and who the real Darrow are. So
okay.
They'll see when they when the presentation happens. But some of those ideas about the quote unquote real Hollow Earth were some stuff that Michael Judge and like Brace Belden and some people were talking about on the TrueAnon podcast when they were doing their whole series on Colonia Dignidad and like the Nazi International and the Spider Network stuff. So there was a brief discussion of the Hollow Earth on it. I listened to it. It just got the wheels in my head turning. So I decided I was like, wrote this essay. My mind is all Hollow Earth stuff right now. So I kind of want to do like a full book on it. So that's kind of like what I'm building up to. So I thought this would be a good place to kind of get some of my initial research down, so people can look at it. Because a lot of people are not really super familiar with the concept to start with, other than just like a basic idea. Or like, I mean, the thing that fascinated me was like, even though there are, ancient narratives of like underground kingdoms and subterranean kingdoms, fairy kingdoms, like I didn't realize before doing this research that a lot of indigenous peoples in the Americas believed that they came from underground originally, which is really fascinating to me because I'm also at the same time reading the Cosmic War stuff by Joe Farrell. So I've been kind of working through that book as well. And so seeing some of those narratives link up has been really super interesting to me. So
cool. That sounds real fascinating.
So we're
it'll probably be an enjoyable kind of introduction for people.
So we're gonna get this from like an occult angle, from like a conspiracy angle, from like kind of like a mythology angle.
We're gonna get kind of touching every little bit. Probably not going into any one of them like super deeply because I mean, there's a lot you could go into there, especially within the conspiracy side. Right. But I think the whole cave monster thing has seen a resurgence in the past year or two because of Hellier and that sort of thing. So the whole idea that there are always sort of strange paranormal things happening around cave systems, I think is something that's like always fascinated me. I don't know. I think the Hollow Earth and the idea of there being like this vast subterranean underworld full of secret things underneath our feet is like very evocative for me, and it has been. I think it is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really like.
Have you done any spelunking yourself?
Yeah, actually, not like super intense spelunking, but well, you guys are in Tennessee. Have you ever been to Raccoon Mountain in Tennessee?
I'm really close to Raccoon Mountain right now. Actually.
Okay, yeah. They've got a really cool cave that they offer like guided tours through.
Yeah.
And I did that when I was younger, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And matter of fact, I mean, there's caves all over in this area, where I am, Chattanooga. I mean, it's Ruby Falls, in and of itself. I mean, that's, kind of like this tourist trap, right? But it's, like the caves are like the falls are piped in, but like the caves are just amazing. Yeah. They found like Nashville too. I mean, they found like saber-toothed tiger, but they also found the same thing here as well. So these cave systems around here are pretty vast in Tennessee and up into Kentucky.
Yeah. There's even stuff that I've been researching like locally in the area, like in Minneapolis, where I think it was the Nesmith Cave hoax, where it was this. It's considered a hoax now, but I have my doubts about that. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of weird little things that are part of the hoax that make me think it may be maybe not real, but maybe a little more than just a hoax. But that this business owner here, I think it was like the late 1800s, had claimed that he had found because there's like a lot of like sandstone, limestone, and stuff around the river, and so I might have broken up there for a second. A lot of these caves, or a lot of these buildings and businesses and stuff, especially breweries, would have sort of underground cellars dug out into these cave systems and stuff. And this guy had claimed that at the back of one of these, cellars or whatever that they had dug out, he had moved this like stone slab and had found this spiral staircase like going down into the earth. And he followed it down with a group of people, and inside they like found like these giant sarcophagi with like 8-foot tall skeletons in it, like utensils and cookware and stuff around. Like they described it like their words were a fairy kingdom. And they traveled like far enough until they ran out of rope, because they were using rope to like not get lost. And they said there were like swords and all kinds of weird stuff in there. And they heard like some kind of noise that like frightened them, and they all ran back out. And then they couldn't find the entrance again. Like the entrance like disappeared apparently, and they never could like show other people where it was. And people came from all over the country like to look at this because it was in the newspapers. That's how people like knew about it. And now it's considered a hoax, but I don't know. I've been doing this stuff for too long. I hear a story like that and I'm like, that's not the only time I've ever heard stories like that. So
well, like Alan Greenfield said the last time we had him on, he doesn't believe there's such things as a hoax.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when I hear Alan and like people say that, it makes me think like, even if it was a hoax, I mean, I don't know. There are a lot of weird cave systems.
Or
there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in them.
What's the intention of creating that story?
Yeah.
And what is that?
Recluse, you were going to say something. I think interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, as far as, the fascination with caves, it's such like a primal thing. I mean, really our earliest temples and so forth were usually built underground or usually based underground in cave systems and so forth. Kind of thinking of like, what is the real famous one in France? The Sorcerer, what is it or something? Can't remember now. But I mean, I think there's definitely something very much to that. It's been such a fascination for us. I mean, really since the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a fun little sync on that is that I think you guys had Joe on a while back who was doing the research about Vergas, Minnesota, about like the murders and stuff that were happening there, or as possible like cult activity and stuff. There were like some unsolved cases, and I remember this was when I was like really deep into like the secret side for UFOnaut stuff, like last December. And I like when he was talking to me about this stuff, I went and looked at the name Vergas because I thought it was like a strange name for a town. And I found a link to a Greek battle, like in the Greek War of Independence or like Greek Civil War or something, where it was like the Battle of Vergas. And it took place near a town called Diros that was the site of a massive subterranean cave complex that was used in Neolithic times for like religious purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So like seeing the name Diro and then like also being like a cave system and stuff. And I'm going to go into that's the thing about the Shaver mystery stuff, because I mean, like, I don't know. I'm fairly certain at this point that Richard Shaver was not really like very well, I'll put it that way. I think a lot of his stories probably weren't necessarily real, quote unquote. But there's all of these weird sinks that pop up around, like, especially the name Darrow. Like, I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago about how there's this old series of TV serials, or not, they were like film serials. I guess it wasn't TV then, but it was called like The Phantom Empire. And it's all public domain now, so you can go watch it. But it's like a Western serial about this group of like cowboys and stuff, like finding this underground kingdom full of this like hyper advanced technology, and there's like guys with ray guns and stuff like that. And the main guy, I think his name is the main actor's name is Frankie Darrow. And like I always like I speculate in the article that like I wonder if Shaver saw this serial right in the theater or something, and then got that name in his head.
Yeah, it just got all mixed up in his mind.
Yeah, but then I see stuff like the cave system called like Eros or whatever, and it almost makes me wonder if it isn't more of like a Twilight language kind of thing, where you have like these words that keep repeating in similar narratives, and then like none of them are completely true, but there's like little nuggets of truth within each one. It's very odd. But yeah,
cool.
Are you familiar with that serial, Dr. Future? Because I saw you like nodding your
have
head.
it. Yeah, as you know, I have it. If you ask me, I have it. I thought Roy Rogers was in that one too. Unless there's another one like it, but I was thinking Roy Rogers was involved.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I looked that up when I think you mentioned that on Where Did the Road Go?
I don't want to trigger anybody by saying that. Okay. I just didn't want to trigger anybody by mentioning Roy.
Well, you were mentioning hoaxes, earlier, and one of in Minnesota, But it's interesting, not too far from there, it was at Fort Dodge Bike was the Cardiff Giant, which incidentally was in the same place where the guy who the actual RC Christian that you found out built the Guidestones.
Right. You see a picture of the original Cardiff Giant in that documentary, Dark Clouds Over Elberton. Although cover part of it because it actually semi-accurate anatomical structures below the waist, if you know what I mean, in granite. So he had to partially cover it. But that in fact, I mentioned that at the end of my blog post I just put up at the Two Spies Report at the end, where I was talking about a lot of these people selling these COVID fixes, and I mentioned the phrase that they often attribute to P.T. Barnum, that there's a sucker born every minute. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned in there a little research, I found out it wasn't P.T. Barnum that said that. It was actually a doctor who bought the Cardiff Giant from the guy who originally had it made. And the guy who had it made was up in the Northeast, and he commissioned them in Fort Dodge to make this to try to fool some gullible Christian clergymen who were talking about Nephilim and talking about the Genesis 6 Nephilim. And so he had them commission it, make it, and then had it buried on property, and they accidentally discovered it, that it was supposedly, fossilized remains of a Nephilim. And so that got all of the Christians spooled up, prophecy stuff. And then he exposed it as a hoax, and then a doctor bought it from him to tour it around as a sideshow. And P.T. Barnum wanted to buy it from him, and he refused to sell it to P.T. Barnum. So Barnum says, well, what the heck? I'll make my own Cardiff Giant. And he made his own and toured it around as if it was the original one. So that's what made this doctor, when he realized that Barnum didn't even care if there was more than one. And he said, well, there's a sucker born every minute, talking about, people who would pay to see it. And of course, most of them saw it at Barnum's thing. So
the giants, whether they were made or is just some weird fossils of some prehistoric creature, it was just such a big business at the time, for all these people in these small towns and stuff, and people come from miles away and pay a nickel or whatever to see it. We were recently on this on the show Brothers of the Serpent, and they're speculating about whether there's more to the giants and some vast Smithsonian hoax. And I'm just really skeptical about it because of that, because it was a business, and that's where people like P.T. Barnum got their start. I mean, it was just a business all across America.
It still is. It still is a business. I mean, did anybody mention Defender earlier? Yeah. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry.
Yeah.
I mean, just to be an elongated head expert, they offer degrees now in elongated head expertise. You can have tours. Now they have like ship tours. It's all all Nephilim all the time on board. So I mean, what has changed?
Yeah.
Come to the Nephilim cruise. Wren, Dave Albin wants to know if it's Brewer's Cave.
It's not, but it's very similar. Same idea. Like Brewer's Cave is in Utah. The Nesmith Cave hoax I'm talking about, it was in Minneapolis, like Minneapolis, St. Paul. But very, very similar. So it's like the same idea, and it's not the only cave. Like there's the I'm trying to remember the name of the cave system where the Paiute Native Americans said that there was a race of red-headed cannibalistic giants that lived in the cave, and they had set fire to the cave and had killed them all. And then apparently there were giant skeletons found in the cave, and with reed sandals and that sort of thing. And then the Smithsonian took the bones, and no one knows where the bones are. So there's stories like this that pop up all over, especially in the 1800s.
Yeah.
So it's very, very odd. I don't know what to make of some of it. And some of it probably is airship mystery style hoaxes that are just because it was popular news at the time. People saw it in the newspaper. They thought, oh, well, maybe I can get some publicity for something by doing it. So I don't doubt that some of the stuff is hoaxes, but there's too many of those stories to not for me not to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Either way, it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And I do believe, like, you know, like I said, I've been reading a lot of the Cosmic War, you know, Giza Death Star kind of stuff. And like, I don't know how deep in the paint I go with some of that stuff, but I will say that I hold like a romantic fascination with the idea that the history of humanity is a lot longer and a lot weirder than we think it is. You know, that there was that, you know, there may have been people here long before the Native Americans came over, you know, that our history may stretch back millions of years rather than just, you know, the 40,000 that we know about. You can't prove any of that stuff. So that's, you know, that's the skeptical argument, right? There's no proof for any of it. But it's one of my favorite areas of like speculation.
Yeah. Something we brought up with them too is like, we were talking about how a lot of these questions are more spiritual and philosophical questions. And when people come into, you know, being at odds with archaeology, and, you know, the archaeologists do have, you know, they're trying to build a science and they're trying to build it out of all the extremes of antiquarianism that, you know, happened before, when it's just anyone with a couple bucks could go out and start digging mounds and stuff like that. But I think the archaeologists have to kind of just understand too that a lot of these people are more on a more spiritual quest to understand like who we are, you know. They're not really archaeological questions, and that these are bigger questions that people are always going to be speculating on and searching for.
Yeah, and it, you know, I think some people are right to that nostalgia, right, for a past that may have never existed. I think people do need to be careful when researching that kind of stuff too, because we see the end result of that in stuff like, you know, the Volkish and movement and like esoteric Nazism and stuff, because that's like the other side of the coin. Right, like believing like that sort of fascist idea of believing in this history that never really existed. So that's like a constant danger doing any of this kind of research, but it's something that if you're aware of, it can, you know, you can work around it.
I just think you got to be conscious of all the context of what's happened already and what the, you know, what the origin of a lot of that stuff is, and the kind of the dark ages that the archaeologists feel like they're getting out of. So they're not really going to be receptive, but, you know.
And I think that there's a danger in building a worldview out of that, right? Like, because when I study this stuff, or when I'm reading this stuff or speculating about it, it's, for me, it's just fun. Like, I enjoy it. Like, I enjoy it. It's kind of like, I have this very pulp science fiction, like space opera romance in my head for like the history of humanity. But I don't make any claims that that's probably what it was really like or anything. It's just fun for me to think about. So I think, you know, I think the danger comes, and this is like all conspiracy or paranormal stuff, right? When you start getting high on your own supply, you know, and like really going too hard into any one thing and like really buying it or building a whole worldview out of this stuff, like use it to inform your worldview and use it to speculate and have fun with your friends. But, you know, maybe don't build a fascist society on top of it.
Yeah, that would definitely be a good thing. Don't do that. Dr. Future, Recluse, you guys have any thoughts on that, or David, on any of this stuff?
In terms of like what exactly the dangers of the sort of primordial past traditions or something to that effect, or
I mean, it could be that, or just like, you know, is there anything to any of any of that?
Well, I mean, I think it's always, you know, interesting, and that kind of gets in a little bit to what I'm going to be talking about in my presentation, is when you start kind of blending fact with fiction. Of course, one of the interests that I've had recently was chronicling the Cybernetic Cultural Research Unit at the University of Warwick in the 90s. And they've, of course, gained a lot of infamy in recent years because Nick Land got his start there. Of course, he kind of became the one of the darlings of the neo-reactionary right with the whole Dark Enlightenment thing and so forth. But they almost really built a whole cult around this whole concept of what they dubbed hyperstition. And essentially, this was theory fiction or something to that effect. It's a theory that you want, that you present, is a work of fiction, and it would almost become a kind of weaponized meme, if you will, if you could get enough people to believe in it. I mean, this actually led them to sort of idolizing the John Carpenter film In the Mouth of Madness, which if you guys have ever seen it, it's about essentially an author's work that becomes reality, and that's because he's become more widely read than the Bible by the time the film starts to happen. And it also brings about an apocalypse as well, but that's another topic. But yeah, I mean, it's just a really fascinating concept of like when you do start this strange merger of reality and fiction. And I mean, I think that this, even though it's not really talked about a lot, this has been a kind of esoteric tradition for a very long time. Of course, you know, you can go back to Kenneth Grant and his obsession with Lovecraft and that type of thing. But I mean, certainly, I think it goes back even further when you do get into things like The Coming Race and that type of stuff, where it is written very much with you know, a strong knowledge of occult doctrine that's incorporated into what is nominally a fictional story, but then eventually some people start trying to make it into a reality. Yeah. And you know, that whole process is very fascinating, and it does raise a lot of interesting questions as to whether it is a bunch of humbug or if there is some basis to all of it.
Yeah, I mean, Blavatsky and Steiner both took like The Coming Race as like real. You know, like they considered it like a real document, and that it was like the real was a real thing, and like completely ran to that, you know, and that led, you know.
And I mean, I think, you know, that sort of shows why, you know, the CCRU was so sophisticated, because they did recognize that a lot of times seeding ideals in civilization was most effectively done through the process of fiction rather than through activism or, you know, scholarly work or something to that effect. So, you know, it's very fascinating. It certainly is.
Yeah. Your episode on the farm about that was really, really cool. And like, I've got this interest in that too, because of the whole like Atlantis Lemuria thing that they believe, you know. Like, that all started because like some guy, I'm not going to say who, because I'm not going to blow up their spot, but some guy tried to insult me by saying that I was a Lemurian, like my interest in like Goetia stuff was Lemurian, and he was an Atlantean, so he was like all light and goodness and stuff, and I was a Lemurian, and I didn't know what he was talking about. So. And then years later, I'm like reading my hyperstition stuff, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's actually cool. Yeah, I'm a Lemurian, sure.
If they ever do that to you again, go back and tell him that he's a shadow, man. The Babylon 5 fans, but that's really doing that with the Vorlons, who are essentially the stand-in for the Atlanteans, and the shadows are the stand-in for the Lemurians, the gods of order and the gods of chaos, and all this stuff. But yeah, they won't know what the hell you're talking about when you bring that out on them, man.
Hell, I mean, it's pretty widely established now that that's really what Mormonism comes from, is a fictional work that was adapted.
Oh yeah, I was just having Mormonism explained to me with like the different spheres of heaven or something in the outer darkness, and what the city of Enoch or Zion that will come down from space in the end times. I finally understood though why it was featured so prominently in the early part of The Expanse, though. It makes a lot of sense now.
Well, there was an antiquarian who was writing this big epic you know, fictional novel about Semitic peoples in some ancient America. And he died and left his manuscript at a printing press who a friend of Joseph Smith's family happened to work at. And that's one of the theories of how that all came about. So that was a literal, you know, piece of fiction that was turned into, you know, one of the fastest growing religions in the world. So
no, when it was being explained to me last night, you know, my first thought was that this would be a great backdrop for a killer D&D game.
So Recluse. It's one of the topic of the CCRU stuff.
Pardon me?
Or go ahead, Dr. Future.
Go ahead, Dr. Future.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Because Adam had just asked me what I thought about it. And if you're talking about the subterranean realities and all that, it's ironic that if you can see, I don't know if you can see my logo on my shirt. This is my original Future Quake shirt that I had made in 2005 when I started it. And it was rolled out and debuted at the Ancient of Days conference of 2005 in Roswell. And there I got to hear a gentleman on these topics that has a ton more credibility than all the rest of us combined. And that's, of course, William Schnoblin. And William Schnoblin was battle in the several layers underground at the fortress where the reptilians were fought by the humans. And in fact, I got his book. I told Adam it has more weirdness per page of anything, of any guest that you all have had or I have had. It's called Strange Invaders, I think it was called, or Space Invaders. But of course, you know, tying in the Mormon lead with. Yeah, well, the tie-in to the Mormon theme you had with the underground, he also talked about. Okay, there's a good one. Yeah, now that's mundane compared to Space Invaders. I'll have to go show it to you. But anyway, he talked about at the conference about how his wife had a higher bloodline in the Mormons, and he did, even though he was a Mormon priest and satanic and Wiccan and what else I forget. But he was able, because of her name connections, to be able to go. He got to go into the basement of the Mormon Tabernacle. What's that, Dave?
Well, he's actually he did have connections to occult.
Dave, what were you going to say?
Oh, Bill does have connections to occult groups, and there's a great Frater Barnabas or Barabbas. I can't remember what his name is. Frater Barabbas has an amazing write-up on this guy's history, which delves into what he was actually involved with. Which Wren, he knew Berteau.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then he flipped. He flipped into what Dr. Future's describing, which was basically a carnival salesman on the Christian.
And what was this guy's name again? The Mormon that you're talking about, or
William Schneblin.
Schneblin. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Schneblin. I mean, you know, well, just to get back, seriously back to what he was trying to say credibly, he got into the basement of the Mormon Tabernacle, and he actually saw the reptilians in the basement of the Mormon Tabernacle that ran it. So I don't know if you all have covered that in your research, but he did talk about that extensively at his talk. But you know, I was a neophyte in 2005.
No, you didn't know.
I do want to incorporate. I do want to incorporate some of the alien, like cave base, like Dulce legend stuff, like into the book. I don't know if I'm going to go into too much of that in the presentation, just because of time. But that's definitely a part of like the book I'm working on, because I think that is just the modern version of those 18th century stories about finding, fairy kingdoms underground. Like you have the 20th century version, which is alien reptilian bases underground and stuff. So I'm definitely gonna get into that.
Yeah,
don't forget the slay stack.
Yeah.
The Phil Schneider stuff
would be part of it too.
Oh, what I wanted to ask Recluse about, since he did the CCRU stuff and the Nick Glenn stuff, like, are you familiar with the DKMU, the Domus Chaotica Marauder Underground?
No, I'm not.
Ooh, you should look that up, because that's like, imagine if a group of people took the hyperstition thing and like ran with it.
Was it like before or after the CCRU?
It was. I actually don't know the timeline on that. I'm pretty sure it's after. Okay. It's like it was like a completely online group of chaos magicians who, their basic idea, like their basic goal of the DKMU was to like destroy reality, like just crack reality open. And so they would form like these cadres and groups that would like do weird things in public and like put up sigils and stuff. Like they created this thing especially called the linking sigil that they would all use in their work and stuff. Like the DKMU is something I just kind of found out about recently, and I've been going down that rabbit hole, but I think you would find them really interesting.
Yes, no, that's very interesting. It's kind of in keeping with where a lot of my research has been going in terms of destroying reality, that is to say.
Yeah.
It's exactly why we want all of you at our conference.
It's this type of conversation right here is exactly that. Was there any questions you guys might have had for each other though? Like David, I know you might have some questions for either Recluse or Dr. Future.
Yeah. So Recluse, in terms of the CCRU stuff, How do you see something like the TTSA fitting into that kind of like metafiction, you know, tied to some deeper stuff? I think there's, I mean, because that's so rife in the ufology. Is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, well, especially when you, I mean, with Lavinda's involvement and all of that, and I mean, of course, he's really going wholesale into kind of crafting his own Lovecraftian fiction now, after sort of advocating the whole Dark Lord thing and linking it up with Lovecraft's fiction and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there is some of that. I mean, it's kind of I mean, it's interesting because it seems like a lot of these different sort of quasi factions within the elites have gotten into that. I mean, with the CCRU stuff, you sort of see Nick Land's affiliation with the Dark Enlightenment, which ties into Peter Thiel and kind of the PayPal Mafia and those types of people. In the UK, you've got Dominic Cummings, who is theoretically a big proponent of accelerationism, which was another one of the big ideologies that the CCRU was into. And then conversely, I mean, I think you have some of that also coming into the TTSA. I think a lot of it probably derives from just really the study of Jacques Vallée and that type of thing, really, and then just sort of the whole climate that was going around, what was it, Stanford and SRI in the 70s, because I mean, this is the whole era where you've got Robert Anton Wilson, the Cosmic Trigger, and that brings in all the stuff with Kenneth Grant and what have you. I mean, certainly these guys had to have been aware of Grant's whole, you know, I mean, ideals in Lovecraft. Yeah. Heavily incorporated into the Illuminatus trilogy by Wilson. So, I mean, it was in the air, you know. I mean, I think these guys are aware of it. And I mean, I would bet money that Lavinda certainly is. So kind of, you know, I mean, it's just interesting because you see it coming at like some of these different angles, nominally with this sort of leftist approach, globalist approach from the TTSA, and then kind of on the right, going into the sort of the Cambridge Analytica stuff that Thiel's involved with, and then all this other stuff with Land and what have you. So, I mean, it's very interesting to see this kind of, I mean, how mainstream a lot of it's become in a sense.
Yeah, but it's rolled out, and they did seed the destruction of reality. And it's interesting too. I mean, with Dr. Future, we mentioned a couple times the Defender Publishing, and the, you know, the kind of Nephilim stuff. If you look into this kind of alternate reality gaming and psychocybernetic, like narrative warfare kind of stuff, Defender is a prime example of that, just in creating a mythology around, you know, the return of the Nephilim, this weaving it through politics and all of that. You know, I mean, they've got their current stuff is on the Antichrist and Final Solution, and how, you know, that's being ushered in by Antifa and the Pope. You know, as those two things merge together in a Nephilim war against the righteousness of someone else. I don't know. I'm not sure what the righteous group is. I guess it's
probably the people behind Shadowgate who are warning about like the elaborate plot by the Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, that's Defender Publishing, Skywatch TV. Yeah, Shadowgate, exactly. Yeah.
Which, I guess that's why I've always referred to them as the grindhouse of Godsploitation.
That's Godsploitation. That was, I've been trying to remember exactly what you called them, and that's the grindhouse of Godsploitation. That is. Oh man, Recluse? Have you read some of these things? Or Wren, have you read any of this stuff?
No, I'm familiar with it.
I get it in my email every Sunday morning.
So I wrote a piece on when the Project Blue Book show came out. I wrote a piece on mediating the UFO narrative, and I was so excited when I saw the hit come in from Skywatch TV. They just go out and kind of scoop blog posts and that, and then they reframe them through the Antichrist Final Solution stuff and returns and that, and then, you know, they just put it up and then relink to the site, and I was like, oh man, they hijacked my research and like have framed it now through this thing that I'm obsessed with. I mean, I have so many of these books because this just, if you can read that title,
The Dawn of Techno-Dimensional Spiritual Warfare.
All this, like, that's a lot, like
it's
a lot more.
Small, we can't see it. Read it.
I can't even.
Okay.
How genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and synthetic biology, nanotechnology, and human enhancement helped the Antichrist. I can't read the second part. I'm just going to assume that it says Antichrist.
Yeah.
The dawn
of the techno-dimensional spiritual.
Human enhancement herald. Oh, Harold. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So this is, and this well, the Grindhouse of Godsploitation. It's fantastic. They're constantly on Jim Bakker's show. So you have tied in with the kind of apocalyptic. It's
how much of that apocalypticism do you think drives policy nowadays? Because like I feel like you see it leak through the cracks with people like Lindsey Graham, but like
no, that's the crazy thing is that, and that's kind of what Dr. Future's his book is about is so I've been obsessed with this since I lived up in Chicago. I actually went to high school right outside of Wheaton, which is where the Billy Graham Center is and that. And my brother worked for the 700 Club. So I've had like a kind of insight into this stuff and seeing it sort of flow through. And so I've been really interested in that kind of like the political meetup of it. Because it just gets into this strange thing. And what was really interesting is the Trump as Cirrus prophecy comes out in like 2014. So 2 years before, he's even running or anything like that, starting to seed through Charisma Magazine and all this stuff, this idea of this, this leader, this world leader that's going to come in as the new Cirrus, who's the pagan king that helps God's people. And they're literally seeding it throughout books. There's a book by Perry Stone on prophecy, and he's writing about what the perfect figure would be to come in and change American culture. And he doesn't Trump, but he describes a charismatic person who's bold, who's kind of an asshole, who, all these things. And you look at it now and you're like, oh man, they were like, again, just kind of like laying these little seeds of this idea. And, if it hadn't been Trump, it could have been somebody else that they supported and put money behind. And the amount of money that flows through this stuff is absolutely insane. When you look at, so the psychic service industry in the United States is a $2 billion a year industry. The Christian product market dwarfs that significantly. And the thing that really clicked in my head was that you can go to Walmart and you can go to grocery stores all over the United States, and these people's books, not Tom Horn necessarily, but folks associated with Horn and folks that are within the milieu, they're available right in the book section at your grocery store. There's who else's books are there? It's like Tom Clancy, maybe, it's bestseller books, and then this stuff. And I mean, it's, the thing that really got me, and I'll be talking about this in my presentation, was Prayers That Rout Demons was in Walmart. And I was like, what is this doing here? And, it's what I call a grocery store grimoire. It's literally a book of Christian magic. And, there it is in Walmart. And so, and the thing when I looked into it, when I actually got into it, why is it in Walmart? Because it makes money. Walmart's out there for any ideological reason. They're putting it out there because people buy it, So, the political influence on this stuff is insane. I mean, it's crazy. And when you've got Trump having Paula White come up there, and Paula White is connected to the Nigerian Pentecostalism and the spread of charismatic Christianity as a geopolitical tool in Africa and South America, he's mixed in with that. So it's literally shaping the way that the United States is currently, and you look at QAnon, right? Like if you look at the Shadowgate stuff or the Shadowland stuff from Skywatch TV and Defender Publishing guys, it's essentially QAnon without saying QAnon, and it's the same exact narrative, but rebranded as Antichrist.
Well, Dave,
policy and of course environmental policy is fueled by this. Basically the attitude of a lot of the Republican establishment is, oh well, let's speed up the end. God is just gonna put the earth back right again anyway, so we can just do whatever we want now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Future.
Dave, I was going to, by the way, tell you, I think you have the coziest locale there of any of us there. It looks like a very cozy place where you are.
Yeah, I want to be comfortable.
Although Recluse does have a cat right now.
I think, I think a guy who represents what I think you're talking about in terms of influence is the Trump Prophet.
Yeah.
The Trump Prophet was, and the Trump Prophecies was published by Defender. And then they jointly produced the movie with Liberty University that was in actual theaters, that was in regular mainstream theaters. And I got hold of a copy, or Adam did, I can't remember. We watched it. And about 2/3 of it was a really hokey kind of narrative. And the last third were guys like General Jerry Boykin and other people basically making a pitch for Israel and right-wing talking points in an interview that comprised about the last third of the movie.
Well, and then that
it went to all these mainstream movie theaters.
Yeah. And that shows the interconnected network, because Jerry Boykin is with Rick Joyner of Morningstar Ministries, which has connections to Russian of Malta. So you have all these interweaving things that what was really, it's interesting with the moral majority concept, which a lot of people are familiar with, this idea, that in 1979, this idea of the moral majority, which essentially was, it was either a Pew Forum or a Gallup poll. I think it was a Gallup poll said that the majority of Americans believed in God. Not that they believed in the Christian God, just that they believed in God. And so then they were able to go forward with this idea of the moral majority. But that conversation was had amongst para-church organizations and church leaders, but it wasn't given to the congregations. So you had charismatic congregations who'd look at Southern Baptists and be like, they're wrong. But then you'd have charismatic leaders and Southern Baptist leaders having private conferences on prayer or something like that. And they'd be having these conversations, which were very political in nature. And you see that with a movie like that, where you're talking about Jerry Boykin, who is, Defender Publishing, I was actually looking at it the other day, they've got a guy who's still consulting with the Pentagon. And he's talking about Nephilim returns and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't want this guy, talking about the return of the Nephilim, and then also, giving policy to the Pentagon. Like that's
God. Living a weird world.
Yeah, I think Recluse is starting to shape. Recluse is starting to shape shift into a chimera. Either that or an animal has popped in his lap. I can't tell whether there's two entities or one there.
This is actually my
He's scratching his own butt or an animal. Okay.
How much something I've thought about, since you mentioned like the Israeli lobby as being a part of this, like how much do you think that this is like being actually manipulated by political powers within Israel? Like I think one of you brought up there's like a connection there in what you're going to be presenting on, but I think that's a really fascinating thing.
I definitely think, because it's just, Israel makes so much money alone just from Christians going there like on holiday and whatever year. That's just the tourism alone is a massive garden industry for them. So just from a financial standpoint alone, they've got such a vested interest in all this kind of stuff. What, nobody else wants to jump in now?
Yes.
As far as the roots of it, my older brother and I had a real seminal event in our life in 1976 when we were walking through a Kmart and saw a copy of The Late Great Planet Earth. And we were church growing guys, but it really had a big impact that like current events could be reflected in something in the Bible. And then things started to take off elsewhere. Cable religious program came up and started augmenting that with prophecy. But in doing some research on this for a book that I'll be publishing, I was able to get my hand on a very, very unique, it was amazing that I got about a guy named Yonah Malachi. And he was a sort of a social scientist that worked for the Israeli government. And the book was published posthumously. He died at a very young age, and then they published it. But it was about his trip over to America, seeing how he could get evangelicals on board with supporting the nation state of Israel. The irony is what he writes in this book was at that time, most of the big people in American Bible prophecy were standing with the Palestinians. And they were very critical of Israel at the time, which I had never heard growing up. That was news to me. But what he said was that the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses were more like British Israelite in their view, and they recommended building on that. And because of the time he was there, I wondered if he actually had made his way to Southern California and had an influence on the circles of Lindsay. When he, out of the blue, nobody knew Hal Lindsey. He never had done a book before. He had a ghostwriter, suddenly published and became a best-selling book of the 1970s, of any nonfiction book. And no one could explain how he got promoted so heavily. And I had suspicions that they must have crossed paths. And I was able to get some more information on Yonah Malachi from some other books that he's forgotten in history. But he did make his way to Southern California in that area, and he went to an important school called Biola University. And he basically hand-built from scratch, a Christian Zionism platform and had them come out and announce this thing about the importance for Christians to standing with Israel. That was not a belief system prior to that time. And I was taught a different mythology, not that it was a big deal at my church, but when you got into the parachurch organization circles, once cable came out and you could see some of these other shows, internet really populated it. And they had a whole different narrative that this went back to the beginnings of the church. And it turns out back at that time, the prophecy community was very skeptical of the nation of Israel or whether God had any plan for it in prophecy. But Yonah Malachi and the Israeli government built from scratch this movement, from what I can tell, and turned the ship around. And obviously they've reaped enormous dividends for that investment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly smacks of perception management. I mean,
yeah, just like how you've explored, Mike, how the pro-business attitude of the American clergy is, fairly recent invention as well. You know, all these things have been kind of engineered.
Right. Yeah, they started from a clean sheet of paper. The same thing with the, America's Divine Destiny. You find a little bit of that in some Puritan literature, but mostly the overwhelming amount of Americans were here to make money. They were here to trade with the Indians and get beaver pelts and send stuff back overseas. But during the Cold War, as I documented, others have too. They said we got to come up with a sacred history because we got to make the Cold War a holy war. And so they had to first posture the communists as atheists, which by and large they are. But then they had to make us as some kind of divine destiny and why the mantle fell on America to win the battle for God.
Democracy throughout the world.
Yeah, and you see that and that process starts with the very idea of Americana and our ideas of like roots music and that kind of thing in terms of like American roots and that because you had in World War I they had a hell of a time convincing German Americans, Irish Americans, African Americans, and all these disparate groups, Hispanic Americans and everybody that they were American and needed to go over and fight a foreign war. And, people were like, nah, I'm kind of just chilling in my land here. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. No, America, And so they were like, well, how do we do this? Well, we bring all these folk cultures together, right? We bring the, it's the Irish, Appalachian music and that kind of thing. And you start to blend this narrative. And so then in World War II, when they were trying to do it, they were like, well, we're not stupid this time. We're not just going to go out to these disparate groups who don't consider themselves American. We're going to actually start to engineer this concept of Americana and what it is to be American and bring that all together. And you've got people like Alan Lomax, Zora Neale Hurston, and all these people that were part of these funded Library of Congress trips to go collect folk culture. They were out there doing their job as scholars, but on the back end of that process is this kind of creation of the American myth, and then add to that the fact that you have these religious power groups and different kind of parachurch organizations and different conversations about what that means and that going into occult groups and that kind of thing. You've got like Alice Bailey's, ideas and that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Don't the occult ideas of a divine destiny of America, it seems like they really predate the Christian ones. In that, the secret was the Manly P. Hall thing that's taken from the Theosophical magazine, and those ideas. It seems like those are occult, or they're really adopted by.
But wasn't there an element of that in Mormonism too?
Yeah, I mean it's a idea that this is Zion.
That goes back to, you've got Francis Bacon, right? The Venice and the concept of the New World being this next step in that. And but I think the thing that's interesting about it is that a lot of those had more globally facing ideas, like the New Atlantis.
Yeah.
It's more of kind of a global concept, whereas
we're like a vanguard in bringing this new age.
Yeah, exactly, and we're kind of like it's more of like a diplomatic, like divine destiny versus what you get, which is a more nationalistic kind of military concept of America as like the thing, everybody else is the enemy. And like Mike pointed out, during the Cold War, again, as a mechanism to kind of get everybody on the same page, that was necessary. And what's interesting now is we see stuff like when Alex Jones started coming out and started talking about the Bilderberg Group and all these things, I was really fascinated because there's a book called Disinformatia, which is about Soviet disinformation that was fed into Europe and seeded into the United States during the 80s and late 70s. And one of their narratives was the Bilderberg Group, because what the Bilderberg Group was doing was they were trying to organize businesses and corporations, and like it
was an anti-communist network.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was an anti-communist network. And then you have Alex Jones coming out, and increasingly now you can see where he's essentially spreading what go to RT. Right, go to Russia Today or look at what is coming out of Russian news, and Alex Jones is spreading. And he's even on the Clint Watt, who's an FBI analyst of disinformation, and that he's on their fellow traveler list for Russian disinformation.
Well, I mean, that relationship is really old, and I mean, it really goes back to the aftermath of the First World War, when it wasn't the KGB, but whatever they had quite a few predecessors, but one of them, the Cheka or something like that, they set up this. It was called the Trust, and it was basically this monarchist white Russian organization that the KGB essentially was running, and it was being used to bring like all of the whites into the fold so they could keep track of all of them. And that kind of morphed into all of like the other the Europas, of the Eastern European emigre groups over the years. I mean, the Ukrainians were like another one that was just heavily compromised by the KGB for years. And this later spread into the anti-communist far-right networks during the Cold War era. So yeah, it's kind of this odd thing where in a lot of cases you see like the far right actually being used to spread a lot of this propaganda that the Soviets were trying to drop into the US, because they had those long-standing ties going back at least to the First World War.
Even before the revolution, back in like the late 19th century, the czarists were sending agents into any Russian embassy. You had guys that were being sent into European capitals, and they were spreading their ideas and what they thought the Holy Russia, the whole Holy Russia idea, and like kind of being as a counterpoint to the West. So they've always kind of held themselves in that light.
And it's really interesting because it's like, I mean, with the early, Soviet intelligence services, the Cheka, I can't remember what exactly it was called, but a lot of the guys
I think you're right. I think it's the Cheka. That was the first after the revolution.
A lot of guys who ended up in there in senior
when was the NKVD?
I think that
20s and 30s.
Yeah. A lot of the guys who ended up in those, I mean, really all the way up to the 30s, they had actually started out as informants for the Tsar's secret police.
Right.
They had been
the Okhrana. Yeah.
Monarchist intelligence officers. They switched sides to the Soviets, and then you fast forward to like the early 80s. It really does seem like the nationalist revolution in Russia was driven by the KGB. I mean, they were the ones who really advocated perestroika. They're the ones that started getting everything privatized, and you see things like Alexander Dugin being given access to those all those works by Julius Evola, and what was it, a Soviet library or something like that. So it also kind of begs the question: who exactly turned who in the long run?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
going to
I think the U.S. will be asking that about paperclip for a long time too.
Yeah.
Good point, Wren. What were you going to say, David?
Oh, well, with Evola, I mean, Evola, his idea of a cult war, right? I mean, you look at Evola's concept of what is actually going on behind the scenes. And yeah, once you get folks that are operating on that level into it, even the writing in that, it becomes, this kind of mimetic infection,
Yeah.
And then you've got people like Bannon, who's, tied to the Trump prophecies and all the rest of it.
I mean, almost like on the flip side of the coin from what you were saying with sort of the biblical prophecies being crafted to sort of point to Trump, I think like on some of this sort of occultic right, there was this whole concept almost of ushering in this Gregor, if you will, of chaos or something, and Trump is kind of now seen as the personification of something like that.
Yeah, you had those the kids that were out during the campaign in 2016 talking about the return of Thule and the rest of it. There was that one that, and it was kind of funny. I mean, it was funny at the time, but it's not so funny now.
Yeah. I mean, the DKNU stuff I linked you to with Recluse.
Yes,
those guys were partially behind the Cult of Keck thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
But Mike, you've written a book really about the Russians and their influence. I mean, you've written a whole book about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is something that's come up several times.
Actually, in fact, I got a whole bunch of Holy War Chronicles to lead, but to do a crash course because I was bad-mouthing everybody else. I was doing the religious right, and I was looking at all the baggage of what I consider Western Christianity and Judaism and things like that. And I didn't know much about the Russian Orthodox Church, but you could argue the Russian Orthodox Church is running things in Russia as much as Putin is. But I think they're sort of seamless in how they're doing it. But when you mentioned Dugin, Dugin really, he is the Rasputin for, and when he has that forum there at with Alex Jones to present his information, I think he's done a lot to disseminate it. But to understand what their whole theory was about being the ancient or the third Rome after Constantinople, and the philosophy of Rome being a Eurasian empire and fighting Carthage, which is, i.e., America and the United Kingdom, which are the seaborne empire that believe in democracy and individualism that they're trying to fight. Until you understand that, a lot of what they're doing doesn't make sense. Yeah. And the fact that Eastern Europe is where we need to start making the continent, why Ukraine was so critically important, and why the Russian Orthodox priests in Ukraine were harboring Russian troops in barracks in their churches, and why they worked to basically overthrow the activities in Poland and particularly Hungary. And they were funding the extremist in France. What's her name? Marine Le Pen. That was all funded by Russian banks, that movement. They were able to take over in Austria not that long ago. And so, and then basically you've got most of the red hat people here are squarely, aligned with them. So they're having incredible success, and doesn't mean that they get stymied for a while, but I think their long-range plan is starting to gradually come to fruition.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that had some tie with like the Ukrainian far-right rebel militias and stuff, if they were like involved in that as well, because there seems to be like a weird religious angle to them as well.
Well, the Ukrainian ones, I mean, a lot of the ones that go back, a lot of them have ties going back to, what was it, the OUNB, the really, fascist one from the Second World War. And these guys really, really hate Russians, okay? I mean, that was actually really what divided the whole, the World Anti-Communist League when they were trying to set it up back in, first in 58 and then 68, because essentially you wanted to bring everybody together, all the different far-right elements. And the Ukrainians were not whites in there, because the whites basically just wanted to restore Mother Russia to what it had been at the time of the revolution, and the Ukrainians, they wanted their independence along with all these other Eastern European countries and so forth. So there really is quite a bit of animosity in a lot of the Ukrainians towards Russia and the whole Holy Russian concept, which is I think one of the big reasons why we've invested so much money in the Ukrainians. But it is murky because on the flip side of the coin, the Ukrainian far-right networks were thoroughly compromised by the KGB. So it's kind of hard to say who exactly is using who at this point.
Yeah.
Connecting it to some of like the spiritual warfare stuff, David, that you've been talking about, the way that Dugin in particular is trying to position Russia as being the answer to this dark transhumanist future as well. He's really he goes over and over on that, and he has like all kinds of propaganda efforts. He has multiple videos, you know, messages to the American people and things like that, like, you know, and it's they're really position themselves against this you know, technological future that we seem to have coming as well. So that ties in with all exactly like those books you were showing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that's, you know, it's when you start to see the it's all painted the same color, you know. I mean, it's all they're using the same terms, they're using the same stuff, and you'll see it repeated a lot of times. I noticed it when I was writing for Reality Sandwich. None of the writers thought anything of going on Russia Today and, you know, being featured, because they were like, oh, it's on TV. And I was like, you guys, that's a state. It's paid for by the Russian state. Like, you know, this is kind of funky that you're on there, like, promoting, like, you know, whatever, because it would always skew anti-American or anti-Western, whatever.
But I'm not surprised that it's moving. I think all this stuff is kind of moving in this grand narrative of this epic battle for the future, and the Silicon Valley elites are these transhumanists who are trying to bring some demonic forces through from the other side through their technology, and, you know, places like Russia will be the only ones to stand against them. It's like, it's really wild. I mean, I was thinking about these possibilities a long time ago, and it seems like it's really coming true.
That's the kind of weird thing though about those narratives is if you look at the psychic studies that the U.S. did, and you look at what the Soviets were doing, the U.S., the researchers, you know, obviously there's multiple levels of research and who's doing what, and some folks probably didn't publish and they just went about their work. But the published stuff, they pull back when they start to hurt people. Like, there was influence, you know, remote influence tests. And when they started to look at the Russian stuff, the Russians were stopping hearts. Like, that's what they were attempting to do, like the men who stare goats kind of thing, right? Like, the Russians were actively doing this with like paired partners, where they would be like, oh, well, if you do it to a friend, are you more susceptible to it, you know? And so they would have people trying to kill each other with their mind. And when the U.S. researchers were looking at this, they were like, well, we're probably not going to do that. And that's why we have remote viewing, because it was a passive modality, right? Like, you weren't going to remote view somebody and kill them, you know. And then there was other stuff, like the stuff that's mentioned in Men Who Stare at Goats. There were different programs in that. So there were attempts to, you know, kind of weaponize it to a certain extent that would affect physical systems. But the Russians were like, they were gung-ho for it. You know, and it's really interesting to read Ingo Swann's novel Starfire, which he wrote as kind of like an intelligence fiction. It was written in the 70s, and he was writing about what it's a fictionalization of what kind of a fictionalization and romanticization of the psychic program at the time. And he writes about the Russian stuff, and it's brutal. You know, like, and then he writes about the U.S. stuff, and their psychic program wasn't brutal, but the microwave weapons testing, which he writes about on the U.S. side. And, you know, so there's these different tiers of possibility, but, you know, both sides trying to paint the other one as the enemy, and both, to some extent, doing experimentations with technology and biology that, you know, get kind of funky. So it's interesting to see, you know, the Russians saying like, oh, this transhuman thing, knowing full well that they're human experimentation, like, is has been kind of nightmarish, and they don't bulk it at, you know.
Yeah, they had the two-headed dogs in the Kremlin for a long time, you know.
Yeah, that's the, you know, there's a good book, Homo Sovieticus, which is about their psycho-cybernetic programs, and it's really interesting because there were, towards the end of the Soviet Union, there were attempts at mass hypnosis, where they were just trying to use like public television to just like hypnotize, and not in a subtle way either. You know, it was just like, we're just going to do this. Hopefully the masses become, you know, hypnotized and robotic to the state. You know, at least in the U.S., it's a little bit more subtle.
I mean,
yeah, it's a little bit more subtle.
Well, on the surface, though, I mean, what do you make of like the possible like child experimentation stuff, like that Whitley Strieber's talked about? Like, what do you make of those?
Like the psychic stuff, Wren?
Yeah, like trying to cultivate psychic potential in children through trauma.
Oh, by the way, that one you were thinking of, that was you were talking about this on Where Did the Road Go, but like Alta Dillard was on my show.
Yeah,
and she talked about going into this place where she was tested, and I remember you talking about that, and that was me. I was like, well, you know, there was stuff going on back in the 60s that was like part of MK Ultra and testing psychic abilities, and yeah, so I think she was probably a part of that. But anyway, that was just a digression.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Air Force, the Air Force flight manual, right? Like comes directly out of high altitude flight tests, and that comes out of Nazi experimentations with extreme, you know. So like you said, the paperclip thing. I think that's something that the U.S. was definitely going to have to deal with, because it's a shadow to have. And the thing is none of that stuff. But I think the issue is that the monolithic concept of government or something, that it's this this kind of hidden hand force that does this stuff. You know, a lot of that stuff was probably contracted out. Like if you look at the stuff in Canada, you know, that was a what am I thinking? Is it Cameron? Who's the guy up in Canada?
Experiments at McGill University.
Yeah, exactly. So you get that that was contracted out, and so they wash their hands of it. A handful of administrators know it exists, maybe, and the guy up there doing horrible stuff.
Well, you still had some kind of quasi CIA involvement. I mean, really, I think ever since the 70s, I mean, all of this stuff was just totally outsourced, or sent over to, host governments or something. I mean, one of the ones you don't hear a lot about is South Africa, but South Africa did a lot of crazy stuff in the 80s, including producing a ton of MDMA that they to experiment with as a crowd control drug, and just happened a lot of the early drug dealers in MDMA were also South Africans too. So
I know someone who was a part of the San Francisco rave scene in the 90s, and he was telling me about how all that ecstasy was from South Africa, and it was pretty well known.
I mean, you see the repercussions of some of that work, like you were talking about, David, with paperclip stuff, like specifically Unit 731 material, and the scientists who worked for Unit 731 being imported into the U.S. to work on biological warfare programs. Like there is that recent thing that came out like last year about how Lyme disease was a possible, accidental or maybe intentional, like biological weapon release. That like Lyme disease itself, at least as we know it now, doesn't exist until like the 1970s. There's no historical record of Lyme disease being around until, and it all kind of comes from this one area where there was like a bioweapons research facility. And if you look at a lot of the Unit 731 research, it was focused around using insects as vectors for bioweapons.
Well, and that's made the U.S. to Russian information operations or Chinese information operations or Iranian information operations or whatever, because we have this secret history that people can't trust what they're told because of things like, and it's weird when you start to actually look at the material, because it like the psychic program was declassified in 95, but you can go back to the 70s and you can see people writing about it. It wasn't
I'd always heard that like the scientists who are doing the research, I mean, they published papers.
There was there was like kind of the public, remote viewing program that was talked about like in the popular press, but then there was sort of also like the stuff that the CIA was paying for that they were.
Well, that's the
publicize as much.
No, that's the interesting thing though, is that the people that were doing the, like Targ and Puthoff and them, they were publishing papers in Nature and .e and that kind of thing. So they
had a lot of the stuff being talked about the Institute of Notic Science and kind of the emerging human potential movements. I mean, it was definitely known at the time. I mean, it was mainly just the CIA involvement was what was being covered up.
And that was their deal, actually. So Targ and Puthoff, their contract essentially allowed them to write about the scientific experiments and the research, but what they couldn't write about was the operational efficacy in terms of actually deploying this in the field as an espionage or for the human influence studies. And then it's really interesting too, because in 75 is when those contracts solidified at SRI. 75 is also the launch of ICOP and the organized skeptical movement, who has ties to different different magazines and that are known vectors of misinformation, disinformation, and leaks.
Yeah. So remember that when you hear Bill Nye say anything.
Well, and that's the thing you can see now too. I mean, with the I was reading something on, it was some kind of article that came out about Bigelow, and it was kind of like a journalist goes to the UFO conference sort of thing. It was written in the 90s, and it was about all these rumors that were going around that Bigelow had this, this organization of different scientists and these connections and that. And, it was written from a skeptical perspective. And now you can look at it and go, oh yeah, well he did, And the other thing, you look at something like Coast to Coast, which he partially helped launch and fund. All the people that were going on Coast to Coast, you'd have all these wacky people. And then suddenly it would be somebody that was actually involved in the remote viewing program or whatever, which has recently been, declassified in that. So there's all these ways to kind of look to the past to see what's going on now and see these ways that it's public, not public.
Yeah, well, that's the fascinating thing that I've personally found out over the last year, was that a lot of these programs, especially remote viewing, I mean, you can read the papers, the efficacy of it, like how good it actually is. And the government never stopped using remote viewers. I personally, I can't reveal too much, but I do personally know someone who was part of a team that was contracted out to do RV for NASA, doing like climate modeling. And this was recent. I think the idea was that they move everything to the private sector, like the UFO research, moving that to Bigelow, right? Because then you don't have to deal with governmental agencies, right? You lose a lot of the red tape, and you don't have to leave a paper trail because these private
aren't for corporations.
Yeah, and you also don't have the bureaucracy to kind of crawl through and because bureaucrats don't want anything to do with this crap. They don't want to see that show up on a line item. Like,
it's also like when you look at some of these major conglomerates, like Cerebus, for instance, which is the company that owns DynCorp now. I mean, DynCorp does a lot of crazy stuff, including making vaccines. They cut grass in the nation's capital. I mean, just all kinds of crazy stuff. But you pull back and you look at Cerebus, they own a bunch of other stuff too. They own some pharmaceutical companies. So it's kind of like, well, what if you want to experiment with some drugs or something in, say, a foreign country? Well, I mean, you can develop it with one branch, one subsidiary. Yeah. You can pass it on to DynCorp. You can send these guys out and do it. And I mean, you have this vast corporate structure where only maybe a handful of people even know what exactly you're trying to do. I mean, it's, developing the way you really just couldn't be within government.
Right. And with the TPSA thing, like I think you wrote about this, didn't you, Recluse, that Chris Mellon he was one of the guys that signed off on the declassification of remote viewing.
Yeah.
So he's not like a new player on this scene, and it's just really interesting to see, those pieces kind of fall together now. Yeah. And all of it. I mean, the thing with the psychic stuff, as Wren, I mean, it's easy to pick up. I mean, one of the things I'm fascinated with in folk culture and kind of folk magic, and that is and popular occultism is the William Walker Atkinson stuff, which was published in the early 1900s. If you read his stuff on mind training and that, and then read the stuff that they were using for remote viewing, it's the same stuff. You know, it's the physical modalities that are totally applicable and open source. You know, it's just do you actually believe it's going to work? You know?
Yeah, I mean, especially like formal CRV, there's a whole element of like automatic writing that's included.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you brought up about the declassification of the remote viewing stuff. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think the declassification was something intentional? Like, was there some perception management reason for them declassifying it?
I think that it was from what I understand, it was because it was essentially a gray thing in terms of they were going to be embarrassed. And I think Morehouse had already started to write his book, and he had been talking to...
it came right after the Gingrich Revolution, correct? When the Republicans recaptured the House, I think it was in like 94 or something. Because I know there was also some like really hardline fundamentalist Christians within the National apparatus that did not like the stuff either. So I think that might have been a factor too.
Yeah, exactly. And they were going to expose it as basically a government overreach and like bullshit money being spent, and like, you know, and they were going to be embarrassed. So it was basically like, let's hang these guys out, you know, like let's do a controlled release and admit what we're doing, you know. And the thing, like we were talking about earlier, it was never that public. Like, it was never that if you were really interested in this stuff, it wasn't, you know, everybody kind of knew that it was going on. It was only the mass public that didn't have the in on the fact that, you know, folks were operationalizing psychic stuff. Because Martin Ebon, who he worked with the American, he worked with the Parapsychological Foundation. He was possibly a past president of the Parapsychology Association. He wrote a book on weaponized, I think it was called Psy-War or something like that. He wrote a book in the 80s on it, you know, and there were books in the 70s. Ingo Swann was like blatant. Ingo Swann was like, because he did the whole thing. He was kind of rebellious in it and was kind of, you know, that was just his shtick, was to kind of poke the bear. So you know, he wrote openly in his Natural ESP book, in the introduction, he talks about, you know, the smoke of psychic warfare on both sides of, you know, the Cold War, and how there were things going on that weren't being out in the open, and how he wanted it out in the open, you know. And the Natural ESP book came out in like 86, 87. In the Defender Publishing stuff, there's I forget his last.
It all goes back to Defender Publishing.
Yeah, for me it does. It's just everything spirals around Jim Bacon, you know. I think his name's Dave Hunt. He wrote a book in the late 80s in 88, which was essentially
he's not related to the Hunt family, is he? Tell me he's not.
I'm not sure. He possibly. I mean, he was Mike. Do you know Dave Hunt stuff?
No, don't be talking about Dave Hunt. Don't be talking about Dave Hunt. I mean, mostly he's an okay guy. He actually comes from a background. I'm sorry, I didn't. It broke up there. I didn't hear you.
He's not a member of the. He's not a member of the really bad Hunt family from Texas, right?
Well, I can't say about ruling families. I'm not clear to say on that. So, but he comes from the Plymouth Brethren, which are some of the early prophecy people. Huh? Yeah. Dave Hunt comes from the Plymouth Brethren, and
that's the same. That's the same group Crowley's parents came from, right?
Yes, Crowley's parents were Plymouth Brethren. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And so they were prophecy thing, but the big thing with this was his Southern California base of operations. And so what I have noticed about a lot of the Californian movies, documentaries, productions, books, is that they sort of project all on America, all that was happening in La La Land in Southern California. So because of what was going on there in the late 60s and 70s, they assumed all of America was just being swept by New Age teaching and that it was taking over America like in Southern California. And their material is produced. And Dave Hunt was mostly a guy who confronted the cults. And they're in Chattanooga. Adam might know a little bit about this, but on the John Ankerberg show, like Christian, Dave Hunt was a regular fixture on there to confront New Age movements and to expose them and how they would change, what they were made out of and stuff. But he was also one of the few guys who actually stood up to Calvinism. And he wrote some books on Calvinism that got a whole lot more heat than the New Age people ever did, or the occultist.
Well, he was,
and so, but he was a pretty hardcore Zionist. Huh?
Oh, I was going to say your point to the Southern.
Come again?
Your point to the Southern California connection. That was what makes this Mind Invaders book so interesting, because he actually, through his prayer groups, had access to folks that were within the security, like military intelligence, that were concerned about the psychic program. And so he fictionalizes it, but essentially there's an FBI guy in the prayer group in the book that comes in and starts talking about psychic spy stuff going on in Palo Alto. And this was written in 1988, so again, it's intelligence fiction.
Yeah.
Hunt is writing a fictionalization of kind of, his view of what was actually going on. So it's an interesting, because of
there was a couple. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dave. There's there's a delay here, so I have a hard time. The Matriciana couple, Mr. and Miss Matriciana, helped produce a lot of that material with him and with other people. And there's a lot of stuff online about that guy being connected to intelligence. I don't know if you've run into that information or not, but both the man and wife have produced a lot of Christian documentaries, anti-cult, anti-New Age, New World Order stuff. I know Chris Pinto has worked with them as well. But again, there's a lot of stuff about him possibly being connected to intelligence, but I don't know.
Okay. I think that's a good place to stop, guys. We've gone like 45 minutes over what I originally intended for this. So,
what do we expect with this cast?
I know, right? Let's just go down the line. We'll start with Wren. Just tell everybody where they can get in touch with you, and also I will tell everybody what time they are speaking. Wren, you are 5:10 to 6:10 on Sunday the 27th. That is p.m. That is Eastern time, so that's 4:10 to 5:10 on Central time for you. Mm-hmm. And so we tell everybody where they can find you.
Okay, yeah. If you want to read some of the articles about like the Dara and stuff that I was talking about, just go to liminalroom.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, some of my contact info is in there, as well as links to my Discord server.
Okay. And Recluse, you are actually going to be on Friday night. You're one of the first four on a Friday night. So you are 8:20 to 9:20 on Eastern time, which is your time zone. And everybody else can figure out what time they can see you. But tell everybody where they can find you and about the farm.
You can check out my Lone Time blog. It's actually about to get in its 10-year anniversary, I think, on October.
Wow.
Hey, congratulations.
Wow.
It's visupview.blogspot.com. That's VISUPVIEW.blogspot.com. And as they said, you can check me out at the farm, which is thefarmpodcast.com. And also check out my book, Strange Tales of the Parapolitical, Post-War Nazis, Mercenaries, and Other Secret History, which is available on Amazon and our official store. And I got my Epstein book coming out hopefully on October 15th, Special Relationship, Book 1, Trump, Epstein, and the Secret History of the Anglo-American Establishment. So keep pace for that. It's going to be some big announcements coming out on that.
Okay, and Dr. Future.
Yeah. When am I going to speak? Am I going to speak?
Yeah. You are speaking on Sunday at 1:15 to 2:15 Eastern Time, which is 12:15 to 1:15 Central. And tell people where they can find you and about your book. And we'll let it catch up.
If you can't remember anything, go to MikeBennettBooks.com. If you can't remember anything else, go to MikeBennettBooks.com. That's MikeBennett books.com. Publisher is akribospress.com, AKRIBOS press.com. My blog, which I've just had 2 very long blog posts about the hydroxychloroquine and a little background on it, may be interested in, and a bunch of other topics, is the 2 Spies Report. 2 Spies, SPIES, report.wordpress.com. And you click out my old Future Quake episodes, all 300 of them there. Some famous people there you might enjoy hearing from at futurequake.com. And would love to hear from you. If you go to MikeBennettBooks.com, there's a place you can send me an email, or at Dr. Future, drfuture at futurequake.com. And I would love for you to get my book. It's 2 Masters and 2 Gospels, Volume 1. And you can get it at any of the normal haunts at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. What's the other kind of place for ebooks? All those, Kobo, those kind of places.
It's a great book, folks. Definitely check it out. I've only read half of it, and I still think it's a classic. So,
and
hey, thanks, buddy. I really appreciate that.
I would have finished it. It's just I left my copy in Kentucky. Hopefully they'll be retrieving it here in about a month.
Oh, is it sitting in the Pennyroyal guys bar right now?
It is. It is with one of the guys. They're guarding Mike's book for me until I return for it. So
nice. Yeah, tell Nathan to read it. And Mr. Metcalfe.
Yep, davidmetcalfe.wordpress.com. David B. Metcalfe on Twitter. And there's links all throughout that.
All right.
Thanks.
David, I was really feeling that, man.
What's that?
I said I was really feeling that, man.
Yeah.
He was on with us and like some other people, so he's been on the marathon.
Yeah, I've been on since 7:30.
So. Oh, okay.
Yeah. He's been on with us for a little while. We had only like a 20-minute break. Okay, well that's it, Sergio. We're going to close this out. Only thing we're going to say, we're not going to give our usual spiel, but guys, www.strangerealitiesconference.com. You've gotten to hear a lot of the guests on this episode. We may make this its own episode. I don't know. We'll have to just see what we decide to do when we actually put this out on the podcast feed, but it already is on the YouTube feed. So guys, we are, as we record this, less than 10 days away from Strange Realities Conference. If you're thinking about getting your ticket in, get it in as soon as you can. We'd love to hang out with you, and you guys can see presentations from these 4 gentlemen and also all the other ones that we've got available for you that whole weekend. Anything that you want to say, Sergio, before we end this live broadcast?
No, just you're gonna, if you like this, you're gonna like the conference, and I really like getting all these minds together like this, and it's the conference is a good reflection of the spread of topics we talk about on the podcast as well. So just seeing everyone there in virtual land at our streaming conference.
That's right. StrangeRealitiesConference.com, September 25th, 26th, and 27th. Join us then. All right, guys, we're out.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal, or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.